So there's been a lot of discussion on the increasing use of CGI and green screen in films lately, with a general consensus, at least in what I've been watching, that it's a negative trend. And while I completely agree with this, I feel that no one has nailed exactly why CG almost always results in a negative effect on the film. This video originally set out to answer that question, but while thinking about it, I started thinking more about what makes a film good or bad in the first place and decided to make a video about that instead. First, we need to consider the fact that films don't just register on a conscious level. In fact, the majority of what you experience in a film is subconscious. That is, you can perceive it, but you're not consciously aware of it. Much like the background noise when you're in most environments, or the quality of the light, or basically anything that you're not used to focusing on. To avoid confusion, I'll be calling the conscious level the rational level, which refers to our brain's ability to consciously process information. It doesn't necessarily refer to a film's plot being rational or irrational. The subconscious level refers to everything you feel about a film without consciously thinking about it or even necessarily being aware that you feel that way. Both of these levels are important, but it's the subconscious level that is far more important. If you take almost any popular film from any era and think about what makes it good, it's often hard to put your finger on beyond saying, it just feels good, I enjoy watching it. There are some films which people do have answers for, and they're key to my argument, so I'll come back to them later. Now, you may have been somewhat surprised when I said that it's the subconscious level that is more important, but this lines up with a lot of what we understand about human behavior. In the book Predictably Irrational, Dan Ariely outlines several ways in which humans make decisions that they think are based on reasoning, but are actually based on irrelevant or irrational feelings. If it weren't for how persuasive yet invisible our subconsciouses are, marketing wouldn't be what it is. Brands wouldn't bother portraying a vehicle to be the ultimate in luxury or performance or whatever. They would simply state what it can do and how much it is, and the best value product would sell. And that's also why a good film is so difficult to make. There are a lot of writers who are skillful at satisfying our rational minds. This person was in this house because they were given the wrong address, this gun didn't work because it was loaded with blanks, etc. I'm not saying that those things are not important. Some movies make great use of conveying intricate details so that the who, what, when, why, and how all come to a satisfying conclusion. But what's even harder to do than writing a script that adds up is composing an entire film experience that adds up. The reason that it's so difficult is that unlike the details of the plot, the sum that we need an experience to add up to is unknown and variable. But let me get specific with two examples, one good, one bad. I use the terms good and bad to refer to my experience with these films. If you don't agree with my taste in films, that's fine, but I'm sure you can think of films that you feel fall into these two categories that I'm going to outline, which then matches your experience of those films being either good or bad. First, John Wick. Now, I'm not a massive fan of John Wick, and particularly not its sequels. The first one was enough for me. But what I found curious about the first one is that it kind of felt better than it should have, and that sentiment was frequently echoed by my friends and other film enthusiasts. Let's be honest, it's not an intricate script, it's not the slightest bit realistic, and it's completely predictable. But people love it. Why? Well, here's my answer and what I believe makes a good film and good art in general. At the heart of any satisfying experience is the intersection of rational thought with subconscious perception. To put it another way, we are most satisfied when our understanding of a film's story intersects with our emotional response with it. Note the word intersect. I'm not saying that our rational thoughts and emotional perceptions need to be the same, but they do need to combine in a satisfying way. I believe that John Wick is a good example of that satisfying intersection for most viewers. The film appeals mostly to the subconscious, even more than most films. It's mostly about sound, style, editing, action, cool clothes, and other visually satisfying elements. But because most people can't completely switch off their conscious thinking, their rational brains, we need a plot and a script to justify the fantasy that we're watching. And here's where it gets really tricky and a lot of films fall flat. The plot to a film that looks and feels like John Wick can't be all reason, intricacy, and clever twists. If it were, the subconscious and the rational would be sending mixed messages and it would just feel off. The plot is therefore necessarily basic. It's just enough that you feel like there's a reason for what's happening on screen, and the two levels of your thinking kind of give each other permission to enjoy it because it feels right. Now for the second example, Den of Thieves. While this film does make some more obvious errors, I would argue that its worst offense is horribly mismatching the tone that it conveys, that is, what we end up feeling in our subconscious, with its plot, which we consciously consider. The first 2 minutes of Den of Thieves is excellent. It may seem simple, but conveying the kind of tone that at least I was picking up is not easy. You know it's going to be tense, you know it's going to be violent, and the on-screen text tells you that it's going to be at least somewhat grounded. It's set in a real city where armed robberies are all too frequent. This is a really satisfying intersection of the subconscious and the rational. But even disregarding a lot of problems I have with the film after that, the biggest problem is that the tone set by the first 2 minutes isn't reflected in the script or even in the events of the first scene. The same signals are sent for a lot of the film. The music stays dark, the camera work stays kind of imprecise, and the feel they're going for is gritty and tense. But the script fluctuates between emulating Heat and emulating Ocean's 11. Both good movies, but two very different movies. While I'm watching Den of Thieves, my subconscious sends me signals that tell me what I'm watching is real. It feels this way because the camera is rarely, if ever, locked down, and the actors are not lit with high-key studio lighting, but then you get moments like this. I know it looks like no big deal, but on-screen titles telling us a character's name, especially when that name seems like a pretty obvious nod to Robin Hood, serve as a reminder to our conscious minds that we're watching a movie, something someone has thought up, filmed, edited. Yes, you could argue that documentaries also have titles, but in that case it would be a full name, probably age or some other factual information, and let's not forget the hyper-Hollywood delivery of this line.
We're cop killers now.
Skip to the ending of the film, and I genuinely wonder if this was two scripts thrown into one. Our rational minds are fed an ending, and therefore a story that was occurring through the whole film, that just doesn't match what we've been looking at for 2 hours. For me, this film has a very unsatisfying intersection of rational thought and subconscious perception. Some of you may still not be convinced. Maybe you like Den of Thieves, and that's fine, but allow me to make one more argument for my theory, using not just mediocre or even good films, but proper masterpieces. I said earlier that there are some exceptions to the rule. That is, the rule of films which are good in a way that people can't quite put their finger on. And The Shawshank Redemption is one of them. Now beware, there are spoilers coming, but quite frankly, if you haven't seen a highly praised film after nearly 30 years, I'm not sure what you're doing on YouTube. You've been warned. What is it that makes Shawshank so popular? Generally, I've found people do have an answer for this. An innocent person escapes from prison, they say. Okay, but it's not the only film where that happens. Or they might say it has a happy ending. What, and that's supposed to be rare, is it? I don't think people really know why they like this film. They think they know, but they don't. To cut a long argument short, I say that Shawshank is one of the only films in which the rational elements seem to conflict with the subconscious elements, but end up intersecting beautifully. What people often remember about Shawshank is that the plot adds up. People love that the posters weren't just about the actresses pictured on them. The rope wasn't going to be used in the way you thought. Andy had a plan for the laundered money all along. And Red's right, you wouldn't notice his shoes. It all just works, but much more importantly, in an unexpected way, it feels very harmonious at the key moments. The stormy night, along with Thomas Newman's score, is not at all what you'd expect for the triumphant moment of our main character. Notice also that this plays off against the more traditionally beautiful music, the Mozart opera, which preempts Andy being thrown in the hole. Beautiful music in the prison, eerie music upon escape. If you've never considered that before, that's exactly my point. Your rational understanding of the events is only a small part of what you're actually experiencing. I argue that Shawshank is so popular because what you're actually experiencing is a beautiful synergy between your rational and subconscious minds. And I would argue that this is the case in any film that you enjoy, whether it feels like it should be a quality piece of cinema or not. And it's especially true when there's seemingly surprisingly no justification for overwhelmingly positive opinions of a film. The Good, the Bad and the Ugly would be one such example of this. Now, whether you like the film or not, surely we can agree that on the surface of the thing, it's not a particularly remarkable film. But clearly, from its reception over almost 60 years now, most people think it's pretty special. My argument is that more important than the tone it conveys, and far more important than the script, is our experience when these two facets collide nicely, and the opposite may be the cause of films that are not particularly enjoyable, even though they look like they should be. To sum up what I'm saying about what makes a film good, the rational elements of most films are at least somewhat important. Sometimes more important, sometimes less. They're going to be more important in a spy thriller than they are in, say, an animated comedy. But the subconscious elements are generally going to do the heavy lifting. Even in plot-centric films, they're still going to be more important than the rational elements. In emotionally driven films, they do almost all the work. But regardless of the ratio of importance in any given film, what really makes or breaks a film is the satisfying intersection of those two aspects. If the music, the cinematography, the foley, the pacing, etc. is beautiful, the film will still be underwhelming if we can't find the intersection of how all that makes us feel with what we consciously know to be happening. But on the flip side, even if the script is only okay, if it then interacts with the way we subconsciously feel about what we're watching in a pleasing way, the resulting film will be enjoyable. Let me know what you think about this, and remember to be nice to each other, and I'll see you soon.